Hi, welcome back. XUnit.net has a lot of power when it comes to controlling the execution of the tests that we're writing. In this module, we're going to start off by learning how we can categorize our tests. So we can categorize individual test methods, or we can categorize all tests within a test class. Once we've assigned tests to test categories, we'll see how we can execute them in Visual Studio Test Explorer and also using the .NET command line interface. We'll learn that if we want to temporarily disable a test from executing, we can skip it. And we'll learn how we can output custom messages during the execution of our tests. We'll learn how we can use the features of XUnit.net to reduce the amount of duplicated code we've got in our test methods. So for example, we'll learn how we can reuse the arrange phase code and also create shared code to clean up after each test executes. If we need to perform setup for our tests, and this setup is expensive or time-consuming, it might slow down the tests. So we'll learn how we can share context between all of the tests in a test class to reduce any overheads. We'll also learn how we can perform a similar technique to share context between test methods in multiple test classes. So let's kick off this module by heading over to Visual Studio and learning how we can categorize our tests. Here we are back in Visual Studio. Let's head over to our boss enemy should test class. And we're going to start off here by categorizing this have correct power test into a separate category, and then we'll see how we can execute just that category. So we're going to come over to the test method here, and we're going to make use of XUnit's trait attribute. The trait attribute takes two parameters. So this first parameter is the name of the trait that we want to assign. We can specify an arbitrary name here, but in this case, we're going to create a new trait with a name of category, and then we're going to assign this a value. Once again, the value is a string, and we're going to create a category called enemy. So now this have correct power test belongs to a trait called category with a value of enemy. If we build this now and head to Test Explorer, notice we've got our tests here from the previous module. If we come up to the drop down here, if we change this grouping to traits, just click that, notice now that we've got two groupings here. One for the category of enemy, and this other one for no traits. Let's go and add a trait to our enemy factory tests. So let's open up the enemy factory should class, and we'll come over to this create normal enemy by default test. And once again, we'll add the trait attribute with a name of category and a value of enemy. If I build this now and head back to Test Explorer, we can see now that we've got two tests showing up under the category of enemy. One from the enemy factory should class, and the other from this boss enemy should class. If we wanted to assign this have correct power test to a different category, for example, we might want to create a category just for boss enemies. If we build this now and head to Test Explorer, notice that we've got this boss category and also this enemy category now. We can also apply the trait attribute at the class level. So if we wanted all of the tests within this enemy factory should class to belong to the enemy category, what we can do is we can just cut this and we'll paste it at the class level. We build this again and head to Test Explorer. Notice now that the enemy category has all of the tests from the enemy factory should class. So now that we've gone and categorized some of our tests, how can we execute only specific categories? This is quite easy in Test Explorer. Remember that we're already in the traits grouping. So all we need to do if we want to run all of the enemy tests, we'll just right-click on this category and choose Run Selected Tests. We can see here we've got 8 tests passed. If we want to execute just the boss category tests, once again we can right-click on the category boss and run those tests. and we can see here we've got one test executed. If we collapse these two down, and we just wanted to run all of the tests with no traits, once again we can right-click No Traits and choose Run Selected Tests. This will run all 18 tests that don't have the trait attribute applied. If we switch back to the class view, if we want to use this grouping, but we still want the ability to filter by traits, we can use the search box here in Test Explorer. If I click this and just start typing, notice here that we've got this trait option. If I click this, it's going to pre-fill the search filter for us, and we can just specify the trait of enemy and hit enter. And notice now, the only tests we get are the tests with the enemy category applied. If we change this to boss, the list of tests is now filtered to only those tests that have a trait of boss. Just clear that, and now we're back to the full list of tests. In addition to using Test Explorer to run specific categories of tests, we can also run specific categories at the .NET command line. So let's see how we can do this. So here we are at the command line, and I've just simplified the prompt here. If I do a directory listing, notice that we're in the GameEngine.tests folder. So as we saw earlier in the course, we can run the .NET test command, and this will execute the tests for us. We can see here that we've got all 27 tests executed. But we can also limit the execution to only those tests with specific traits. To do this, we can use the -- filter option of the .NET test command. So let's add that. So now we can specify the name-value pair representing the name of the trait, in our case category, and the value, for example, enemy. So let's start off with the trait name. In our case, it's category, and we'll execute only those tests that belong to the enemy category. If I hit enter now, notice that before we had 27 tests executed, whereas this time we've only got 8. And if we go back to Visual Studio and head to Test Explorer and change back to Traits View, we can see here that we've got 8 tests in the enemy category. Let's go and run just the boss category tests now. So we'll head back to the command line, and this time we'll specify category equals boss. If we execute this, notice this time that we only get one test executed because we only have one test in the boss category. We can also specify multiple categories to execute. To do this, what we're going to do is surround the filter expression here in double quotes, and we're going to use the pipe or the OR operator to specify an additional criteria. So what we're going to do here is execute tests if the category equals boss or the category equals enemy. If I hit enter now, this time we should get 9 tests executed, 8 from the enemy category and 1 from the boss category. If we have a test, but we don't want it to be executed along with the other tests, we can skip the test. So let's go down to this create normal enemy by default not type example, and we'll go and skip this test. To skip a test, all we need to do is provide a value for the skip property of the fact attribute. This is a string, and the string contains the reason why this test is currently skipped. So let's just provide a description here. We're just going to say, don't need to run this. Let's just build this, and we'll come down to Test Explorer. Notice here we've got our enemy factory tests, and we're going to run all of these tests. And when the test run is complete, notice we have this warning icon here for the test that we've just skipped. On the right here we can see the test summary, 7 tests passed and 1 test skipped. And if we click on this skipped test, the test result window is telling us that we've skipped this test. If we head over to the command prompt, once again we're in the test project directory. If we run .NET test, once the test run is complete, we can see here that we've got 27 tests executed, 26 passed, and 1 skipped now. If we have a look at the .NET Test options, notice we've got this verbosity. We can set this to quiet, minimal, normal, detailed, or diagnostic. Let's go and run the tests again. And we'll try normal. Notice here that we get a lot of detail, including the test that we've skipped, and the reason for the test being skipped. Don't need to run this. You should take care when using this ability to skip tests. Usually, skipping a test is only a temporary thing. If a test no longer adds value, then the test should be removed from the test suite. There's nothing worse than opening a solution and finding out that half the tests are skipped. If you're a new developer to the project, you have no idea about which tests are actually adding value and which ones might have been skipped in error, or perhaps they've been skipped temporarily, but the developer has forgotten to unskip them.